Hello and welcome to this very exciting event where we're launching the motion that Labour for a Green New Deal will be campaigning for at Labour Party Conference 2021. So that's this September, and also Momentum's first ever policy primary later this week. My name's Rosie and I'll be chairing this evening. I'm Labour for a Green New Deal's local group support team co-lead, a bit of a mouthful, but I help support local groups. I'm really excited to be joined by some really excellent speakers this evening to take you through the motion, explain why it's such an important intervention, and to tell you what you can do to help. That's the big one. So please stay around so that you can hear what you can do to help with this motion. So we have Chris Saltmarsh, co-founder of Labour for a Green New Deal, Riccardo la Torre, who's National Officer at the Brigades Union, and Jess Barnard, Chair of Young Labour. It's quite a lineup. After we've heard from our speakers, there'll be an opportunity to ask questions about the details of the motion, why we think this is an important intervention to make right now, and as I said, how you can help. So without further ado, first up, to introduce Labour for a Green New Deal's motion and the reasoning behind it is Chris Saltmarsh. As I said, Chris co-founded Labour for a Green New Deal in 2019 and is currently chair of the steering group and political strategy coordination team lead. So over to you, Chris.
Thanks so much, Rosie. And I'm just realizing that over the development of Labour for a Green New Deal, we've done a very good job of creating teams with incredibly long names and positions with even longer names. But yeah, really big thanks to everyone for coming this evening. I'm really excited to launch the motion that we'll be campaigning on this year and that we've put an awful lot of work into developing. So I'll talk through it in a moment, and I think when I get onto it, Rosie will share her screen so we can all see it while I talk through it. But just before then, I just wanted to give a quick overview of how we've come up with this motion. Last year in 2020, we spent a lot of time renewing our strategy, our priorities, and really reflecting on what our political priorities were as well, especially in the context of the pandemic, the general election defeat, and the new Labour leadership. So this kind of widespread consultation that we did with our local groups, with activists, with volunteers, and with our allies in the movement, that's all contributed to informing the motion that we're going to be speaking about this evening. In terms of writing the motion itself, we put a call out to our activists and our supporters. We put a call out to our policy team to submit lines, to submit topics about things that they wanted to see in our motion for this year. And then we worked with our allies, including the FBU and reps from Momentum, to bring all of those proposals together and pull them together into a motion that we felt is timely in the kind of current political context, but also strategic in terms of our longer term campaign for a socialist Green New Deal within and around the Labour Party. So, as I hope you can see on the screen, that's the motion. That's part of the document that we'll come on to later, which has all of the motions that are up for voting in Momentum's policy primary. So just to start in that kind of notes section right at the top, what that section is doing, I think, is really framing the context and the issues that the rest of this motion exists within. So one of the points we're really making there is that the climate and environmental crises are continuing unabated, while the pandemic is exacerbating many of the economic injustices that we really believe share a kind of root cause with the climate crisis too. Most acutely arising from this pandemic, I think we're bound to see an unemployment crisis this year when furlough and other government support schemes end and the kind of economic impact of the pandemic begins to be really sharply felt. And then internal to Labour as well, we wanted to recognise that the arguments we're making, what we're putting forward in this motion, are very much consistent with the agenda that the current Labour leadership campaigned for itself on the basis of. So the pandemic has obviously disrupted all of our priorities over the last year, and the current Labour leadership has at times been criticised for not being strong enough on these issues in the Green New Deal. But I think what we're really trying to say is that we feel that this is consistent with the mandate that the Labour leadership has to support a socialist and transformative Green New Deal. So then moving on to the beliefs section. Here, I think what we're doing is really reiterating the political analysis that has underpinned the Green New Deal and the campaigns around it so far. So we've got a note there around privatization and how the private sector has really totally failed to tackle climate change and economic injustice, and really linking that to why we need a government-led Green New Deal that expands the public sector, brings large sections of the economy into public ownership. And in doing that, in bringing those utilities and those industries into public ownership, giving us the possibility of really driving the economic mobilization of the Green New Deal as quickly, but also as fairly as possible, and making sure that profit no longer becomes this kind of inhibiting force in the economy when it comes to these challenges. So then moving into the resolve section, this is the real meat, the real substance of the motion. What we're calling for is a green jobs revolution. What we're talking about with the Green Jobs Revolution is a program of a government-led program which will create and provide jobs right across the economy. So this isn't just men wearing hard hats, erecting wind farms, or retrofitting homes, although those will be incredibly important parts of our vision for a Green New Deal. We're defining green jobs expansively. We're saying that green jobs are any that contribute to the green transition, to the Green New Deal, and to a new economy that meets everyone's basic needs. So these green jobs will be in green energy, in green technology, and manufacturing, but it will also be in expanding public transport and in rail. We'll have green jobs, as I said, in retrofitting homes as part of the effort to eliminate fuel poverty. And it will be in agriculture to make sure that we have a food transition as well. And then, of course, they'll be in basic services, including social care, broadband, rewilding in national parks. Those are the ones we have the words to fit in the motion, but it will also of course, include the National Health Service and education and other basic services. Really crucially, I think it's important to remember that all of these jobs, as I said before, will be in the public sector. That should happen either by nationalizing existing industries or creating new ones. And that's so that we can guarantee workers' rights, we can guarantee that the transition is fast, and we can guarantee that it's fair. I think as well, moving on to the just transition element of the motion, I think we want to be really clear that absolutely central to this program of green jobs is a recognition that while some new industries will be born, others will need to be phased out in the most polluting industries. And justice for workers in those sectors is a total priority. So that's why we're calling for a job guarantee for workers in those industries and a comprehensive retraining program on equivalent pay and conditions, pay negotiated on union rates, so that no worker, no community is left behind by this transition. And actually, it's a transition that guarantees prosperity and security and power for those workers. And that's as well why we've included the line on repealing anti-trade union laws. That's something that we've carried over from the 2019 Socialist Green New Deal motion. And it's also why we're saying that all of these green jobs should be unionized. So we should be creating millions of green jobs, and that should be bringing all of those workers into trade unions as well, because this green jobs revolution shouldn't just be a revolution in climate justice and the kind of tactical aspects of the economy. It should also be a revolution in workers' power to rebalance the class forces in our economy, which at the moment works almost exclusively for the rich at the expense of the poor and workers. And then coming towards the end of the motion, there's a line on finance. And I think, what I wanted to emphasize here is that we felt it was beyond the scope of a 250-word motion to really get into the details of, well, how are you going to pay for all this? I think we should understand a lot of this as investment rather than kind of public spending that is sunk cost. But we did want to include that note on national and regional investment banks, publicly owned, because the government needs to be giving itself the kind of financial capabilities to be making these investments. We thought it was important to have regional investment banks, green investment banks, so that they can contribute to driving this economic mobilization, the Green New Deal, right across the economy and right across the country, and that there can be elements of regional economic democracy in guiding where that investment is placed, but also a national investment bank to oversee that process, to coordinate the kind of economic mobilization of the Green New Deal, and to make sure that the finance is distributed fairly and rationally across the economy as part of that kind of centrally planned Green New Deal. And then finally, coming on to the last couple of points, we felt that it was really important where we spoke about what is essentially a proposal for an industrial strategy in the UK in the context of these crises that we're dealing with, that we should not forget and we should continue to prioritize the internationalist element of the Green New Deal. And that internationalism was really central to what we were campaigning on in 2019, and it continues to be today even more urgently. So that's why we're linking that kind of domestic program of economic transformation to its internationalist potential. That's why we're proposing that government uses its public procurement powers, which will be expanded with an expanded public sector and nationalized industries, to promote decarbonisation, to promote workers' rights, and to promote international justice throughout global supply chains. And it's also why we're reiterating calls for Labour to support those transfers of resources and technology, all of that tech that will be developed as part of this green jobs revolution, transferring that for free or for cheap. This is an idea that John McDonnell promoted in the 2019 manifesto to the global south and to countries that require that finance and that support to transition their own economies. So that's the motion. As I said, it's been the product of lots of discussions, lots and lots of input from Labour for Green New Deal activists and our allies in the movement as well. So I'm really, really glad, I'm really proud to present it. I'm really happy to answer any questions that you might have about either the content or how it was written after Riccardo and Jess have spoken later as well.
Thanks so much, Chris. So as you can see, went into a lot of detail with there, but you can check in the chat box for links to where you can find that motion to read it through yourself and really understand what Chris has been explaining. So thank you so much for talking us through the Green Jobs Revolution motion and explaining the reasoning behind it. So now I'm thrilled to introduce Riccardo la Torre. Riccardo is National Officer at the Fire Brigades Union and has been a long-time supporter of a socialist Green New Deal. Over to you, Riccardo, to explain why FBU is supporting this motion and also to hear your own motion to repeal anti-trade union laws.
Thank you, Rosie, and thanks for giving us the opportunity to speak this evening on what is such an important motion for all workers, you know, when we consider the size of the threat that working people are faced with in the face of the climate crisis. But why the FBU are supporting? Because particularly for FBU members, for firefighters, for emergency control staff, you know, climate change is an industrial issue, and it's not an industrial issue that's around the corner. It's not an industrial issue tomorrow. It's a workplace issue today, in the here and now, as firefighters and control staff find themselves on the front line every day, you know, tackling the effects of the climate crisis. And when I say that, I don't just mean, you know, the horrific large-scale incidents we see around the globe, which I'm sure everyone will be aware of. I mean, most obviously the Yarnell Hill fire in Arizona springs to mind, you know, wildfire where we saw the biggest loss of firefighter life since 9/11. You know, 19 firefighters died that day. You know, 19 workers, 19 trade unionists were killed on the front line tackling the effects of this emergency. That's the scale of the crisis, the challenge that we're talking about here. But it's not just in faraway places around the globe that firefighters are facing. It's here at home. You know, we are facing the effects of climate change. We are facing a record number of wildfires in the UK. We've seen an increase in mass flooding incidents, yet we're having to respond to that with reduced resources, with cut funding, with less jobs. And perversely, at the same time we're seeing the effects of climate change intensify here at home, we've seen over 11,000 firefighters cut just since 2010. So it becomes clear that austerity and cuts of public services are directly undermining our resilience to be able to not just plan ahead, but respond now and today to the effects of the crisis. So we welcome the commitments in this motion, particularly the commitments to funding of the Fire and Rescue Service, to the funding of flood defences, the commitment to mandatory building regulations, and particularly the commitment to the repeal of all anti-trade union laws, a key element of this motion, and I'll touch on that shortly. But that's why we chuck our weight behind the campaign and campaigning for the issues that are addressed by this motion. And we can look proudly back to the Labour Party conference of 2019, when we worked with Labour for a Green New Deal to pass an ambitious and bold motion that was subsequently incorporated into the Labour Party manifesto. And that called, and unapologetically, for a path to net zero carbon emissions by 2030, but understood that public ownership and workers' rights had to be at the heart of that. And the reason why this motion is so important now is because, sadly, we're seeing the Labour Party row back on that. We're seeing the Labour leadership renege on that. When we look at the Green Economic Recovery Plan that the Labour Party produced, it completely reneges on the demands that we fought for, that unions and activists fought for. Now, there is no mention at all of repealing any of the anti-trade union laws, just weak pledges to giving trade unions a voice. And there's no commitments to public ownership, despite Starmer himself pledging to do so in his leadership campaign. So it becomes vital, that we are clear, and this motion helps do that there must be no retreat on the socialist policies that we fought for within that socialist New Deal. So we continue to work with Labour for a Green New Deal, and we work to help shape this resolution for them, particularly for those reasons. So it makes strong commitments to repealing all anti-trade union laws, a key element to delivering all of the demands of this motion when tackling this crisis, not just from what I said before. Austerity is directly affecting our ability to respond now, and workers can't fight back against that austerity with our hands tied behind our back by draconian anti-trade union laws. But much more widely than that, whilst these laws exist, we cannot fight as workers for wider political issues outside of the workplace. Well, certainly not lawfully. So yes, we need to be putting demands on a future Labour government, but we also need workers' action from below. And by repealing the anti-trade union laws, that demand gives workers the space to be able to fight for all the other demands within this motion. And it's so important to us, in fact, so key to us. We've actually got our own standalone motion that we worked with 3A unions and others on the very issue of repealing anti-trade union laws. This motion reaffirms that public ownership is not just appropriate, but is necessary and has to be at the heart of any socialist New Deal. So for all of those reasons and more, we will continue, as we have done, to work with Labour for a Green New Deal, to hold the party leadership's feet to the fire, to ensure that the Labour Party have a bold socialist climate programme. We can't talk about this as if it's a choice. This isn't a question, that this has to be done. So we would urge Momentum members to support the Labour for a Green New Deal motion, as well as the FBU motion on the anti-trade union laws in the upcoming primaries. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that, Riccardo. As you said, no retreat is really, really important. And the 2019 manifesto that we worked together in the unions were amazing for supporting as well. Had so much good in it, and we want to keep that going. But thank you so much for coming. Labour for a Green New Deal's relationship of solidarity with the FBU, it really is one of our greatest sources of strength. And we know that together we can organise for a socialist Green New Deal. So thank you so much. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Jess Barnard. So Jess is the chair of Young Labour and will tell us why she thinks we need a green jobs revolution and a Green New Deal. So over to you, Jess.
Thanks so much, Rosie. Thanks everyone for coming. I'm really excited actually to be speaking at this launch, because I think thinking back to 2019, and I know that feels like a whole lifetime ago now, but the movement that was created behind Labour for a Green New Deal and the mobilisation of members and the enthusiasm to demand climate justice within our movement was absolutely incredible. So watching that motion pass through our conference and watching our party commit to what we need to commit to tackle the climate crisis was absolutely huge. So I'm really pleased that we are keeping on top of this as members and making sure that we are the party that is bringing forward the policies that we need to tackle the biggest crises of our generations. And I think, I just want to go back and touch on, to start with, some of the comments that have been made about the pandemic and the impact on people and on jobs and on the climate that we're existing in. And the pandemic has exposed just how precarious our work and our economy is, and the exploitative practices that exist within companies, who've used this pandemic to make billions in profit, and attempted to force workers to accept worse terms and conditions under extreme pressure at a time when there is very few job opportunities out there, who have little option but to accept the pressures that are being put under by their employers. So I think, it's really important to highlight that the Tories' argument around tackling the climate crisis is often based around the free market and saying that businesses will hold the solutions to the climate crisis and that they can be trusted to act ethically and do their part. And if anything, the past year has shown us that this just couldn't be further from the truth. Job losses, as we've seen from reports today, have just been absolutely huge, and young people account for 2/3 of the job losses caused by COVID, and 88% of the job losses from COVID were people under 35. So this is hugely impacting younger people and younger generations in terms of the unemployment crisis. And alongside that, you've also got, nearly 3 million people on universal credit, and many more are unable to access their financial support. And as the government scheme of furlough comes to an end, there are a lot of workers really concerned about their future, about how they're going to be making money and what they're going to be living off. And there doesn't seem to be a long-term plan to bring us out of this crisis. So we're in the middle of two mammoth defining challenges that are going to be such an uphill struggle to come out from: the climate crisis and this looming unemployment crisis. So now is exactly the time for us to be delivering a green jobs revolution. Any jobs program that doesn't address the climate crisis is going to be short-sighted as a solution, and it's going to leave us failing in our fight to secure a safe and sustainable future for our planet. But any attempts to combat the climate crisis which don't bring workers and jobs along with us will worsen the unemployment crisis and create a huge divide between the working classes and those trying to address climate change. So that's why the only way forward is with a comprehensive green jobs revolution, not just a handful of jobs in one or two areas or some tick box environmental role in local council, but a complete overhaul about the way that we look at our economy that embeds sustainability, climate justice, public ownership and unionised jobs central to every single industry. We need to create the infrastructure that's fit for this century, but also the challenges that lie ahead, rather than looking back to the old solutions that we've always based our economy around, like mass road building projects and diesel cars. We need to get creative and look at investing in public transportation and infrastructure based around needs of communities and workers, rather than what makes a profit for a private bus or train company. And obviously, it's really important that we mention that years of austerity, cuts to local authorities have left communities very much exposed to the elements. We've left our flood defences unfunded, and our fire and rescue services, as Riccardo touched upon, have been drastically underfunded, leaving communities and areas where flooding is a risk very much exposed. So reinvesting in local authority and ring-fencing funding for these services is essential to protect lives, homes, communities against the ever-increasing impacts of climate breakdown. And also, I'm really pleased that this motion touches upon, and also, as Chris has already mentioned, the international aspect of tackling climate breakdown, because this is an international struggle. And so sharing these technologies and making sure we are supporting and building an international solidarity against this crisis is absolutely fundamental to any conversation about tackling climate justice. And also, of course, something I'm really pleased to see in this motion, talking about retraining and giving support to workers who need to retrain away from unsustainable industries. So providing that support, economic and training opportunities to reskill into sustainable, meaningful industries with long-term job protection and union representation is absolutely fundamental to the future of green industrialized jobs. So prioritising this motion is absolutely a first step, and making sure that we hold the Labour Party to account in being at the forefront of demanding the solutions to the climate crisis. And so I really look forward to working with all of you to support this motion, encourage Momentum members to support this motion and get this passed at Labour Party conference this year. And that must be the first step, because this is a long-term battle and we need to be making sure that our government is taking action to address the climate crisis now. So far, they are falling far behind their targets, which were not enough to begin with. And so the Labour Party must be at the forefront of this struggle, demanding action now. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jess. What a rallying cry as well. And just to reiterate what that says, exactly, government is nowhere far enough. This is a long-term struggle, but organising for this motion is a really important part of that to do now as well. So just to explain a little bit of what we're going to talk about next. So I'm going to talk about what you can do with this motion. And as you can see in the chat, we've kind of been talking about Momentum primaries. We've also been talking about Labour conference. So don't worry, we're going to be answering some of those questions soon. And then we're also going to have a Q&A as well. So we've already had some questions put in the chat, but if you want to put more in the chat as well about the motion, about the reasoning, that kind of thing, please feel free to do that. But thank you so much, Jess, for joining us. And I think it's really important, as well as the chair of Young Labourers, for all of the massive impact that the looming unemployment crisis will have on everyone, but particularly our younger generation as well is going to be huge. So I think it's really, really important to bring that up when it comes to jobs. So as we've said, there's kind of two things going on at the same time here. We're talking about the motion for Labour Party conference, that's this September 2021. Before that, the process of getting of choosing the motions to discuss at conference to be passed on the conference floor goes through your CLPs. But before that, this is the first year that Momentum is doing a policy primary. And so that's why that's being discussed in the chat as well, because you can vote for the Green Jobs Revolution motion as part of that primary. And the document that we showed earlier when Chris was explaining it, that's a long one, it's 18, because the Green Jobs Revolution is one of the motions that you can vote for. Because Labour for a Green New Deal really is going to throw everything we can and really campaign for a Green Jobs Revolution and organising for the Labour leadership to back these necessary proposals, but we need your help to do this. So the three takeaways, the three things that we want everyone on this call to do. Firstly, if you're a Momentum member or you know someone who's a Momentum member, you can vote for Labour for a Green New Deal's Green Jobs Revolution motion as number 1 in the Momentum policy primary. Ballots will arrive by email tomorrow, and you can vote for 8 of the 30 motions that are up to choose from. By prioritising the Green Jobs Revolution motion, we can maximise the chances that Momentum will support a radical Green New Deal at conference this year. We're also recommending that Labour for Green New Deal supporters vote for the National Food Service, 4-day week, and the FBU's crucial motion on repealing anti-trade union laws as well. So in the chat, you'll have seen people posting the link to the Momentum policy primary. That's where you can see the motions. And do check your emails tomorrow for the ballot if you're a Momentum member, or give someone a nudge if you know someone who is. Secondly, you can ask 10 friends or comrades, people that you organise with in your community who are members of Momentum, to vote for the motion. So really set yourself that challenge, and because we need as much support as possible to guarantee Momentum's backing. In the chat, we've put we've already made a message that you can just copy and paste, put in your WhatsApp groups. You can put it in WhatsApp, you can send it via text or email. So we've already made that as easy as possible for you. So if you're a Momentum member, please vote on the Green Jobs Revolution #1. Do ask your friends and comrades to vote for it too. And then thirdly, the big one that will come a little bit later, and the timeline is passing the motion at your CLP. So we want you to pledge now to propose the Green Jobs Revolution motion for your CLP to send to Labour Conference 2021. CLP meetings to decide which conference motion to back will begin in about May, after the local and devolved elections, and will run up to the end of August. So please pledge and sign up to pledge now. Sign up, click on the form to say that you're going to propose the Green Jobs Revolution motion, and then we'll provide you the support for how to go through that process. So if you've passed a motion at your CLP before, or if you're brand new to it and have no idea how to, please just sign up and we'll be sending you the support later. So just to recap, that's everyone on here who's a Momentum member. You can vote for Labour for a Green New Deal's Green Jobs Revolution as #1 tomorrow, when the Momentum policy primary starts and the ballots drop. You can also send the handy message that we've already put together in the chat box to friends to ask them to do it as well. And you can also send extra reasons that you've learned today as to why they should do that. And third, please fill in the form to pledge that you're going to propose the Green Jobs Revolution motion in your CLP to send to Labour Conference, and we'll send the information that you need in order to support you in that. So don't worry, I know that's a lot of information, but we're going to go back to it in a little bit. We'll have a recap. But for now, we really want to open it up to questions. So we'll have about 15 minutes for our speakers to answer any of your questions. Chris will answer any about the details of the motion, of the process of writing it, and Riccardo and Jess will jump in on anything broader. So if you haven't already, please post questions in the chat. That's really the easiest way, and we'll choose them from there. I'm seeing some hands being put up, but please, if you can post the questions in the chat, that's the way that we're going to take them today, just because we've got lots of people on here. So the first question, because we're talking about passing the motions of the CLP as well, is someone has asked about amendments and how the motion goes through. So I was just going to pass that over to Chris in terms of the process to make sure that's really clear.
Yeah, so just to be really clear, so the ask, I just firstly wanted to clear up on the Momentum process, because I saw a couple of people asking about Momentum as well. So although the Momentum branding is on the document that has the motion on that we were sharing, this is a motion that's been written by Labour for a Green New Deal in collaboration with the FBU, in collaboration with some representatives from Momentum. So it's a Labour for a Green New Deal motion. It's just in that big document with all of the other motions that Momentum members will be able to vote on. And then, yeah, I saw a question as well about whether the Labour Party takes Momentum's views into account on these things. The real use of having Momentum back this motion is that they can help campaign for it, basically. And then when it comes to conference, they'll be essentially, organising members who are delegates to be voting for the motion. So that's the real value of the Momentum policy primary. And then in terms of Rosie's question about CLPs and amendments, so yeah, I think it's really, people have been noting in the chat that if you're sending this motion to your CLP, there'll be people who want to amend it. That's inevitable, and that's fine, and that's a good thing. What we saw in 2019 was the motion that was passed by conference was actually much longer, more detailed than the motion that Labour for a Green New Deal had circulated, because in 120 CLPs around the country, it had been amended, and that meant that lots of different wording made its way to conference. And that's, as I say, that's a good thing because it means that we have more to play with. So there's a compositing process at conference. So that's a meeting before the actual debate where all of those motions are kind of merged into one by discussion and by negotiation. And yeah, so if there's something you think is missing in the motion, then you can amend it at your CLP. Other people might do the same. But yeah, I think the really crucial thing is those amendments aren't a bad thing. Don't let the possibility of an amendment dissuade you from trying to put it through the CLP. The more motions that we have going through CLPs to conference as possible will be good because it will demonstrate the grassroots support for this motion.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's also worth noting that conference motions, when they're passed at your CLP to go through to conference, are 250 words. So if you realize why all of the motions in that document look kind of short in a way to some of the motions you might see at your Labour Party meetings, it's because of that limit. So that's worth bearing in mind when it comes to amendments. And obviously, the more they look the same, the easier it is in compositing, but exactly as Chris said, amendments are good, they're useful, and we just want to pass as many motions as possible. We had another question as well about deadlines, I think just because that's specifically on the process. Chris, do you mind if I pass that back to you in terms of just reiterating when the deadlines often are for passing the motions, and then we'll have some questions about the content, and if there's other questions for the speakers as well, do say.
Yeah, so I'll answer really quickly. The deadline, I think, for passing motions through CLPs is the 13th of September. I'll put a link in the chat, which is where I got that information from. So it's a long time. Most CLPs will have one meeting where they discuss and debate and vote on conference motions. So that could be in May, it could be towards the end, it could be August, it could be September. It's just worth checking with your CLP secretary for them to tell you when that is.
I'm muted, that's embarrassing, sorry, hope you didn't miss that much. We have a couple of questions about the content as well and things coming through, so I'm just going to go. So one of the first questions we've got is, there's a big focus as well in one of the bullet points on transport. Someone's asked, what is the argument for local public transport uniquely, and why do we make such a big deal out of it, as well as other than maybe essentials like shelter or energy? Why does it get its own bullet point? Although it is worth saying that the others are included in the motion. So who would like to, yeah, Chris, do you want to go first?
I'm coming. If anyone else wants to jump in, do feel free. Yeah, I think it's just worth saying on this, the constraints of having to write a 250-word motion just inevitably means there's so much that we support that couldn't be in there. So it was kind of a calculation about what do we think is the most strategic intervention to be making in this moment. And so we included a line about free bus travel because I think that's been a reasonably popular demand, and it's possibly quite achievable within the time frame, within a kind of shortish time frame. But yeah, that's not to say that we don't support one of the benefits of having public ownership of other services, whether it's energy or anything else, is that that can be made incredibly cheap or for free, as part of that effort to eliminate fuel poverty. So again, it's not that we don't support that, but it's just so hard to fit everything you want into the 250 words. And also it's worth saying our policy team will be doing a series of explainers for each line of the motion, and that will be really unpacking kind of a lot of what's behind that and what we mean by it and what we'll be campaigning around it as well. So it may be that things like that will be included later in those justifications.
Thank you. Jess or Riccardo, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, happy to. Like obviously Chris said, there's huge elements to this, and I do feel for everyone who had to kind of pull this together, because trying to fit every change that you need to see in 250 words to address the climate crisis is quite the challenge, isn't it? But in terms of transport, I think that sorry, there's loads of sirens going past my window, sorry if it's really loud. But this is really, really essential. If we're going to start to look at, in particular, a green jobs revolution, we need to be thinking about how workers are able to access those jobs. I live in Norwich, I'm in Norfolk, and transport is absolutely a huge issue for workers who just cannot access job job opportunities, but also training opportunities. So if we want to be upskilling or reskilling workers to work in sustainable industries, this is all the kinds of infrastructure that we need to make that a reality for people. And so I think it's really important that we look at transport as a priority, which is something we could quite easily transition into a much more sustainable model. And we are way behind where we should be in terms of our targets. And if you look at local councils, very little has been done to kind of retrofit buses to green models. Very little has been done to invest again in those infrastructures, train lines, all those kinds of things that we could be looking at, rather than huge road building projects which just put more cars, more lorries on our roads. So I think this is a really, really key issue to a lot of young workers and a lot of workers around the UK, not just in our big cities.
Thanks, Jess. I think between the two of you really covered that. We have a question here as well that I think will be especially for Riccardo, although I'm sure all of you might have something to say. Someone's asked, much like Roosevelt's New Deal was achieved through the pressure of the militant rank and file trade union movement, how can we make this relevant to the rank and file of unions today? So if I go to you first, Riccardo.
Cheers, Rosie. Absolutely, I think so. For starters, I think it all goes back to the balance of forces comment that Chris made at the beginning of this. Workers absolutely have to be, the voice of workers has to be central to this plan. And I'd go further and say the voice of workers has to lead on this plan, because nothing we have seen incredibly no longer abstract. We've seen through this pandemic that when we are hit by crisis, how our society, how our system is set up becomes incredibly important. How it's run and who it's run for has become key to this. And our power lays in the workplace. We've seen it again through this pandemic, when big decisions were made, not for the benefit of people, but for the benefit of profit. It was workers coming together, organising workplaces, being unapologetically militant and combative when required, that has made U-turns from as small as getting a shield put up in the workplace to a U-turn to the government on schools. And when we look back on action taken directly over this issue, when we look at the climate strikes and how shackled workers were from supporting those strikes, when we look at the recent Black Lives Matter movement and how workers were shackled from supporting that lawfully within their workplaces, when we've now seen how the funding of the NHS goes so much wider beyond just those who work and are employed by the NHS, we see the need for workers to harness that power, rebalance that power within the workplace and start pushing back, not just to show solidarity with other workers, but to campaign and fight for issues that go just beyond our own workplace, but literally the question of how we set up our society in general and who do we set it up for.
Thank you. That's a really excellent answer. Chris or Jess, would you like to go in on that? Or we've got a couple more questions as well. Just looking for nods. No, that's okay. We can go to another one as well. I think Riccardo covered it very comprehensively. I say, so this one for Chris or Jess. What advantage does this have, this motion, over supporting the CEE bill, or if there's differences, then supporting it and calling for additions or amendments?
Yeah, I can come in on that. So on the CEE bill, that's obviously had a lot of support over recent months. I think it's important to be clear on what the difference is between them. So both in terms of process, so the CEE bill is a bill that's being put to Parliament. So that's kind of very much in the hands of MPs now. And of course, if you support that, then I'm sure lobbying them will be very effective. Labour for Green Deal's motion is very much focused on what Labour Party policy is. And so I don't think they're exclusive in any way. If you support both the CEE bill and our Green Jobs Revolution motion, I think it's entirely possible. And I would certainly encourage you to be actively campaigning for both, kind of happening in different spheres at the moment. But then I guess just a quick note on the content. My understanding of what the CEE bill is doing is very much upgrading the UK's kind of inadequate climate change legislation, the processes that the UK is using to set its targets and set its kind of plans. What the Green Jobs Revolution motion is doing, it's really an intervention to try and push Labour to having a radical socialist transformative industrial strategy as part of a Green New Deal for this revolution in green jobs to really kind of tackle the root causes of both the climate crisis and the economic injustices that we're seeing as well. So I think if you support both, they're certainly complementary. But the CE bill is a bit more in terms of political legislation. The Green Jobs Revolution bill is, I think, it's an intervention around industrial strategy.
Thank you, Chris. Again, Jess or Riccardo, just give me a nod if you'd like to come in on that.
Yeah, sure. Chris has mostly covered it, I think. I do think that they are obviously both worth supporting, but do cover slightly different angles. And obviously, as Chris said, this motion is about an entire overhaul of the economy works and an entire shift to a sustainable economic model. What I would say is that I think the reason that you should also support not only like a bill working its way through Parliament, but also a motion through Labour Party conference is making sure that this is a priority of the leadership of the Labour Party. Obviously, we have seen Keir committed to pledges like green sustainability and policies that were developed in the last manifestos in his leadership election. We haven't seen too much discussion from the leadership around these issues since. And so I think it's really important that we acknowledge that, and we acknowledge the need to keep the pressure up by passing this motion through conference and making it really clear that this is a priority for all of our membership, but also people in our communities, our workers, our trade unions, our young workers and young members, because all of us are affected by these crises, and we need to make sure that we are supporting this through the democratic mechanisms in the Labour Party. So I'd encourage you to support both in any ways that you can.
Thanks so much, Jess. Cool. So we have a couple more questions, I think just about enough time for them. But don't worry if your question hasn't been asked. I'm really sorry we haven't got around to it, but please do contact us. We'll put an email address in a minute. So do send a message, the questions, if you've thought of one but haven't put it down, or you have a spark of inspiration in half an hour, you can still email us at info@. But yeah, we'll just have a couple more questions before recapping on the 3 things that you can do going away. So one of them is, how do we use these resolutions to build stronger links into the way we organise at a municipal level, local Green New Deals, and mobilising local communities behind these demands? Which I think is a really, really important question. And so I'm going to be cheeky as chair, but also as co-lead of the local group support team to answer this slightly as well, which is that anyone who's in a local group will have heard, but anyone who wants to be in a local group, do check out our website for Get Involved as well with how to start. But we've spent a lot of time discussing about what campaign demands will be coming out. And we've been looking at housing, we've been looking at transport, and I think this is very much reflected by this motion, because any campaigns that we are running locally to be a socialist Green New Deal, the perspective that we're bringing in, the priorities that we're bringing in are reflected in this. It has to be working with trade unions locally. It has to be including workers locally. If we're demanding something from our local authority, what do jobs look like within that? Are they unionised, well-paid jobs? It's looking at how we can push our local authorities about retrofitting. Again, mentioned in included in the motion. It's talking about public ownership of local buses, and we've just seen in Manchester that the Metro Mayor has been able to bring buses under public control. It's looking at that and how we recreate that locally as well. So I think both of it is the perspective of who we're organising with, what questions we're asking to make sure that it's reflecting those principles of tackling inequality and injustice, as well as talking about public ownership and what that means at a local level too. But Jess, it would be great if you wanted to come in on here. Sorry to pull you, but I know as a councillor as well, it'd be really great to hear from you here.
Yeah, sure. There's quite a lot of ways that I think we can work together, like at a local level as well. I was on, well, I am still for another month, a councillor on Norfolk County Council, and so that's a majority Conservative led council. So it has been really tricky trying to get some local commitments to tackle the climate crisis, but we did manage to get them to agree to a 2030 carbon neutrality target for Norfolk, and that was through working groups, bringing in experts and making the Conservatives listen to them. So there are kind of tactics you can use at local government, and I think it's really worth like reaching out to your local councillors and local representatives to see what you can do collectively to make sure local councils are taking this seriously. If you do have Labour councils, obviously you can probably do a little bit more, so obviously passing Labour for Green New Deal motions at local council level, raising awareness of their commitments to tackling the climate crisis is really important, and there's lots that local councils can do, although slightly restricted in terms of having a budget available to them to do it. Like in Norwich, for example, we've had the development of passive housing, which is council owned, so that's sustainable housing development, which is council properties, and so if people are interested in hearing more about that and hearing about how councils can do that, we can look at linking you up with some Norwich councillors who oversaw that. So there's lots of things going on at local levels, and I think it's a really good opportunity for us to share that information, to work together to bring about that change locally too.
Thanks, Jess. And obviously one of the ways that you can do that if you're in a local group but not is starting that conversation by passing this motion at your CLP, by bringing it forward and saying why it's a priority and why we need to be talking about this at conference, because that can really get things going locally, and it can help you link up with the people that you need to be linked up with locally as well. We have one more question that I think I'm just going to try and sneak in, if that's okay. It'll probably be for Chris, but I'm sure he can come up with a very snappy answer. So it's about the momentum policy primary. There's lots of policies, lots of motions, to choose from and support. There's another one that's been mentioned in the chat, which is the global climate justice. Motion as well. So just wanted to touch upon that. And if you can talk about agricultural transition and what that means, might be a bit much, but it's a challenge for you there.
Yeah, thanks, Rosie. Yeah, really quickly on agricultural transition. We'll, as I said before, we'll be producing some resources which really unpack a lot of these things that we just didn't have the words to expand on. But really quickly, this is about decarbonizing agriculture. We know that food emissions from food is like a really significant contributor to greenhouse gases. So it's about introducing new forms of more sustainable agriculture, but also having a just transition and for agricultural workers, making sure that those workers are empowered as part of the broader green jobs revolution as well. And then on the question on the global climate justice motion, I think one of the great things about this momentum policy primary process is that we don't have to choose between one or the other. So if you're looking at both of these kind of Green New Deal climate motions and you're really excited by both of them, then you can vote yes on both of them. You can prioritize both of them, and I'd certainly encourage you to do it. The reason why I think we're certainly making the case around this Green Jobs Revolution motion, as I said before, we think that right now what we need is an intervention around industrial strategy. We think that what we need is a transformation to the economy. We need a response to this unemployment crisis, and I think the Green Jobs Revolution motion does that really, really well. And I think as well, part of what we want to do is really build a broad movement and coalition around the Green New Deal that we're fighting for across the Labour Party, across the Labour movement, which includes our affiliated trade unions, and also across the climate movement too. And I think the motion that we put forward does a really good job of kind of communicating the priorities that we have in relation to the Green New Deal, and also being a point of unity that we can continue to build with our comrades in trade unions. And it's been really great to have Riccardo here this evening, and I think we want to continue to build that solidarity right across the Labour movement. But as I say, there's absolutely nothing stopping you voting for both if you really want to make sure that momentum and the Labour Party is prioritising climate justice over the next few years. And I'd say, I'd certainly encourage you to do that.
Thanks, Chris. And thanks, Riccardo and Jess, for your answers too. It's been really, really great having you on and having your expertise as well. So once again, sorry if we couldn't get through all the questions or any that you've put in the chat box, but please, you're welcome to email info@labourgnd.uk and we will get back to you about those questions. So do that. We've heard this evening about Labour for a Green New Deal's plan to keep pushing the Labour Party towards a socialist Green New Deal to tackle the connected crises of climate, pandemic and unemployment. As we've heard already this evening, if we're going to win Labour's support for a green jobs revolution, we need your help. So one last time before we leave, firstly, we need each and every Momentum member on this call to vote for Labour for a Green New Deal's Green Jobs Revolution motion in Momentum's policy primary. Stick us as #1. Ballots are dropping tomorrow, so check your emails, check your junk box just in case. And the competition for 8 motions is tight, so every vote will count in ensuring that Momentum supports our radical plan so they can help organise their members for conference too. Secondly, we need your help persuading your friends and comrades to support the motion. So forward on the message, which is being reposted into the chat, onto 10 people. Go on, if you've got a large WhatsApp, like we have about a zillion ones for our local Labour Party, then you'll get them all at once. So forward on the message this evening, either by text, WhatsApp or email. And finally, this Momentum primary is just the beginning. So sign up to pledge to submit the Green Jobs Revolution motion through to Labour Conference through your CLP. And CLP meetings to vote on which conference motion to support will begin after the local and devolved elections in May and run right up to the end of August. So sign up now, make sure so that you can get the emails for how to support and how you can do that in the best way. We'll keep you updated and give you the support to make sure that we send as many Green Jobs Revolution motions as possible to Labour Conference 2021. In 2019, we had over 100 CLPs pass the motion, so let's see if we can beat it. But yeah, thanks to everyone for coming this evening. A massive thank you again to our amazing speakers, and solidarity. All enjoy the rest of your evening.